Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Mon. I'm the acting chair for the comprehensive permit application at 582 Blue Hill Avenue. With me is Mr. Frank O'Brien and Ms. Giselle Joffer, members of the board. Today is August 4th, which is the 24th session of the public hearing on this matter. Tonight is scheduled to hear from the peer review consultants with respect to the most recent submittal from the applicant. I'd like to also hear from the applicant on the meeting, the working session that was conducted. We'll get updated on that. And then to the extent that the town has anything to add, we'll certainly hear from the town, but we also principally want to hear from the peer review consultants on the most recent of submittals. Now, in the intervening time between tonight and the last time we met on July 21st, we did receive correspondence from the town. I want to formally thank members of the select board and members of the planning board for their participation in this hearing and for their written comments, which will be reviewed carefully. Before I ask Mr. Schomer to update us on the results of the working session, and I don't want to take it in that order so that we can be sure that the peer review consultants' reports from Mr. Reardon and Mr. Bomer will incorporate that session. Let me ask the members of the board if they've got anything they'd like to add at this time.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Nothing from me at this time. Thank you.
Same here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Schomer.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, board members.
Good evening.
Just to update the members and members of the public, following the last hearing, which was 2 weeks ago tonight, we scheduled a working session with Mr. Reardon and Mr. Bomer and members of our team, and as well as Ms. Barrett, to go over some ideas regarding the site massing that we discussed. It was a very productive meeting. It lasted about an hour, and we hashed out a lot of ideas. They gave us some very helpful feedback and pointed us in some directions that we hadn't necessarily considered. So over the weekend, while following that meeting, we grouped together as a team and discussed those ideas and feasibility, and talked about what we could do and what we didn't think we could do, and we gave Dan at Embark a big homework assignment, and I think we ruined his weekend doing that. He spent all weekend working on a revised sketch plan, which he circulated among our team on Monday, following which I reached back out to Ms. Barrett to suggest that if we could move heaven and earth to get everyone back together before tonight's meeting with the board, it might be productive to do that. So we thank the peer reviewers and Ms. Barrett for clearing their schedules this morning. We had a second working session this morning to discuss the revised plan from Embark, and I won't steal a single syllable of Dan's thunder, but I think we have a very productive plan to show you tonight. We're a very promising plan. We think that this is going in the direction that the peer reviewers pointed us and the board members, we believe, pointed us. So we're looking forward to showing this to you and getting your feedback on this plan. But we're very excited about this. So thank you very much to Mr. Reardon, Mr. Bomer, Ms. Barrett. And if it pleases the board, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to Dan Riggs to go straight into that plan.
Mr. Riggs.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you to the board. I'll let me just share my screen. So as Jesse was saying, we're excited to share this is really the latest evolution of the plan, which we think really addresses a few of the remaining comments that we have and comments that we heard in the session last week. So with that, I'll just jump right into it. So a few of the remaining comments that we heard really, and Mr. Mullen has mentioned this before as well, but we were looking to reduce the footprint of the project on the site, and with that increasing slack space, we're looking to open up view angles to the existing house from specifically from Blue Hill Avenue, as well as lessen the length of the north building, this building that my cursor is over now, and really recenter the historic home as the center of the composition of her buildings. So with that, we identified really this piece of the north building here that's segmented by this red line that you see dashed on the screen, which represents a footprint of about 3,000 gross square feet in our project. So 3,000 square feet per floor of that north building. As well as reducing the length of that north building here by 50 feet from the front of Blue Hill Avenue backwards. And to accomplish that, we were looking to slightly downsize some of our unit sizes, as well as kind of relocate some of that mass in other places on the site where we felt like it was less impactful. So we were looking to relocate some of that mass that we cut from this building to the top of the west building here, using a significant setback at the top to mitigate the effects of that massing, as well as to sort of capture the space here at the secondary setback of the north building where it has the least amount of impact relative to the Meeting House Lane residents. So this is a diagram of that revised massing proposal here. So here you can see the dramatic setback for the new top floor of the west building, as well as the much shortened north building. And you can see below that the old footprint of the north building there, shown to give you an idea of what that 3,000 square foot piece really represents. So with that, with the reshuffling of the unit sizes and a slight increase in one bedrooms relative to the unit totals, we were able to relocate 6 units back into the north building here and place 6 units at the top of the west building in a way that we think doesn't affect sight lines in a significant way, and is probably the most proper place in the site to add additional mass. So here's a site plan diagram showing that again. So with the changes, we've gone from 86 units to 84. And part of that was just removing 2 units from the existing house. We really felt like that would be the best for protecting the historic integrity of that existing house by minimizing the amount of renovation work we would perform in there. We've slightly reduced with the unit size reshuffling and changes. We've slightly reduced the footprint in the west building, and we've reduced the footprint pretty dramatically in the north building for a combined total of 3,000 gross square feet again in the footprint reduction. And with the 2 units we've lost, we've also reduced the parking count by 3 spaces. And we did that in what we think is the most sort of critical point on the site to get some additional slack. Really, at this point in the drive sequence where you come around the parking podium, it'll allow for more seamless transition between the site and that podium, an easier kind of connection in the sidewalk from this lower area to the front of the site, and just an overall greater setback from the Delphi property. And with that new recaptured space here, we really have a new opportunity for an additional landscape area at the front of the site, which we think will greatly improve the experience for residents as well as those driving by the site and experiencing the site from Blue Hill Avenue and off of the property. And one of the real big impacts too with that move is, again, recentering this historic building as sort of the heart of the composition of the project. So you can see with the cutback here, the sight lines to the house would be increased dramatically from all off of Blue Hill Avenue, everywhere sort of north and northeast of the site. These are unit plans showing that we really worked through this pretty thoughtfully, and with that slight reduction in unit sizes, we went from a 1,050 square foot, 2-bed average to about a 980 square foot 2-bed average. And reduced the size of the 3 bedrooms from an average of 1,280 square feet down to about a 1,200 square foot average for the 3 beds. So all of those moves together really allowed us to recapture some space within the north building. And here at the 4th floor, you can see the previous, that was that secondary setback we had on the fourth floor previously. So not a significant change to allow us to retain the units that we need to make this project viable in that location. And this is the additional floor on the west building. So as you can see here, it features significant setbacks. They range from 6 feet to 10 feet in most locations, and would be encapsulated within the roof structure of that building. So again, the revised unit total here, 84 units, 130 parking spaces. 36 of those would be 1-bed units for a 43% ratio. 39 of those units would be 2-bed for 46% ratio. And 9 of those units would be 3 beds for an 11% ratio, rounding up from the required 10. And the next series of drawings are really going to kind of compare the previous proposal with this updated proposal here. So you can see the top section cut here. This is cut through the west building and the historic garden down to Meeting House Lane here at the bottom of this drawing. So with this move, really highlighting how recapturing space on that secondary setback creates greater efficiency in that north building without really affecting the sight lines from the first floor of the Meeting House Lane abutters. So this line is meant to be drawn from the first floor, kind of finished floor of the Meeting House Lane abutter at 56 Meeting House Lane, and showing that comparative angle of what you'd see beyond that initial parapet on this 3-story piece. And this also shows how we're trying to use the setbacks of the additional floor of the west building to really minimize the impact of that additional story. And again, as the site rises up towards the Bose Hill part of the neighborhood, really feel like that additional topography change at that part of the site helps to minimize the impact of that height on the west building as well. And this is a section cut from north to south through the garden again, and the existing house, and through the north building. So you can see in this section, the north building is essentially remained the same in this view. And we're starting to give you an idea of how we would recapture some of the square footage within that west building here. So as opposed to the mansard roof, which has a very minimal kind of cant back from the main wall line, you can see in this view here, which is a very slight cant. We're really introducing much more dramatic cant, and in this new proposal, we're looking to kind of mimic the roof lines of the existing house to reduce that pitch and really create a more dramatic setback that would be read from the street. And again, this red line here is just looking at the view shed impact from our neighbors at 10 Barbara Lane. And with that canted setback, it really doesn't create much more of a view impact than it had previously. And again, that line is meant to represent what you really view from that site in the first finished floor of the adjacent neighbor. So really where that line terminates is the last thing you'd see as you're looking up towards the building. And that this sort of base section here would be consistent in the new proposal, and again, be the part of your view that sort of terminates the roof line of the building from that vantage point. This is a entry perspective you've seen before. So this is from our May 10th submission. At the entryway to the site from Blue Hill Avenue, and this is a mock-up of our new massing and new footprint from Blue Hill Avenue again. So the dashed lines here represent where the previous massing had been placed, again, 50 feet closer to Blue Hill Avenue. So cutting back 50 feet, losing 3,000 gross square feet in the footprint there really allows us to minimize the weight of the north building in the composition and refocus the real attention on the existing house, which we all really feel should be at the center of this project. And this is a mock-up of the view from Meeting House Lane. So again, the existing trees are shown here ghosted to allow you to see the house through them and beyond them. And we're showing the May 10th perspective here, but dashing in the lines of where the new massing would be. And again, from the closer neighbors, the impact of this upper portion of the north building would be minimized because you'd be seeing this closer parapet would actually kind of start to dominate your view the closer you get to the building. And this is also mocking up that additional height of the west building that we're adding there in the distance. So that concludes the presentation we had prepared for you today, and I'll pass it back to you for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Riggs. Mr. Schomer, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chair. This is the extent of what we went through today's meeting. This reflects some new changes that have been done in the last couple of hours with recommendations of Mr. Bearden and Mr. Bomer. So today's meeting was very productive, as was last week's, and we'd be very appreciative of any feedback that members have, and if the peer reviewers have any comments they'd like to make, that would be appreciated as well.
I think before we have questions, maybe perhaps we could hear a summary from Ms. Barrett about the meeting, and then perhaps Mr. Bomer could speak to the presentation.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. I mean, my role in today's meeting was the organizer. As Attorney Schomer said, I was asked to get the peer review consultants together on pretty short notice, and they all did. I think that they both have probably comments for you about this package. It was a fine working session. I mean, I thought that it was pretty productive, frankly.
Great. Mr. Bomer, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Just a very brief, I think I don't want to beat the drum you've heard a million times. I think for me, what has been the most positive direction on this development has actually, I think Dan Riggs expressed it well, of really centering the historic building in the composition. I think we all know it started with preservation of the historic garden. There remained a high level of frustration about not really restoring the prominence of the home as part of the appreciation of the site from the public realm. And that's where we've been pushing, is to really follow through on that historic driven type of a scheme, a historic driven design based scheme. I think what underlies most of my reviews, I think it is impact analysis. And I think this latest round of changes has been looking at putting massing. It's not my role to figure out why the massing, why the volume needs to be exactly what the volume is, but my role is to, I think, help identify the best course for locating the massing in the least impactful place. And there has certainly been a lot of evolution on that front. So from my perspective, it's a really important change. I think that the redistribution of most of that massing, not all of it, because there was some loss, but the redistribution is putting it, in my opinion, in parts of the composition that are least impactful. We encouraged that view angle study to really look at areas of opportunity or volumes of opportunity. It really is important to actually get your feet on the ground and look from where people actually see these developments. So the view angle, even though it's just a two-dimensional analysis, is actually really revealing to figure out what really is the controlling edge in the facades of buildings. And I appreciate the analysis. I think it's an honest analysis and accurate as best I can tell. without really digging into a model, a Revit or an AutoCAD model and really checking it, but it looks very credible to me. I think that there are some opportunities that opened up and we did have a meeting, I think it was this morning. It's been a long day, but I think it was this morning.
11:30, Cliff.
Thank you. Thank you. Not that long ago. But in any case, I think that this movement of particularly backing up the facade, the west facade on the north building, opened up something that I had not really thought about, which is really how the design process works. You draw things and you look at them and you react to your own ideas. I think what it opened up is an opportunity, and that hasn't been resolved because this is evolving as we speak, for a more integrated kind of landscape plan, because there's now enough space on that west side of the north building to really make a nice connection with that very large open green space that fronts on the highway. And that opportunity really didn't exist before. It was just too tightly packed in that part of the site. So I think the next generation, I see two challenges ahead. It's normal that I don't mean challenges in the sense that they're not achievable, but they're the next design steps would be to go back to the landscape plan, see what the overall landscape is, including what started out as actually a very large parking podium has turned into I think a kind of unexpected result of pulling back that building has kind of made a compositional link between the historic building and the north building. So it's really changed the balance of the whole composition. So I think what looks now like two buildings surrounded by quite a lot of usable outdoor space. So if it were my project, that's the direction I would push now, is developing the design of the outdoor space for one. And the second challenge is the facade design on the west building. The west building did increase in height. I don't think it's significantly impactful to the neighbors on Meeting House Lane. That's my opinion. I do think it is it is a prominent view along the highway and needs to be taken very seriously and carefully designed. I will say that committing to an 8-foot setback is a really good start. I work with many developers who propose 12-inch, 16-inch, 18-inch setbacks that in a building of that scale sometimes aren't all that meaningful. An 8-foot setback is a big setback, and it gives you a lot of material you can work with to help mitigate the scale of the building. And I think that what pushed the massing in that direction, the redistribution of the massing in that direction, has a lot to do with the preservation of the tree line along the road as well. And significant landscaping in the foreground is one of the most effective mitigation strategies for bigger buildings that you can really take advantage of. It's not planting a 4-inch caliper tree and crossing your fingers and hoping it survives. So you have real material to work with that is there from day one. So overall, I think as far as the working sessions, I've appreciated the willingness to really open up the design process and treat it as an iterative learning process, which in my opinion is the best way to end up with a successful project. So I'm pleased with the direction. I think it's been pushed certainly in the direction that I and I think other reviewers have been interested in, which is this preservation-driven scheme. Not that all details are worked out. They're not all worked out. There's still a lot to look at. But the direction, I think, is admirable. And I guess I'll leave it at that unless you have questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moore. I do have a question, but before we get to the questions, I wonder if Mr. Reardon has anything he'd like to add to what we've heard so far.
Yeah, just a bit real quick. These are all positive changes from a civil engineering standpoint. As you can imagine, reducing 3,000 square feet of roof in exchange for what will largely be, we expect, landscaped area is a big help in terms of stormwater. And pulling back that podium corner at what we consider probably the most restrictive portion of the site really did a lot to sort of relieve some pressure that had been building up at that location. I don't know if you recall, but the prior pedestrian circulation plans didn't have a connection through that corner. So now we have not only the opportunity for a connection, but a pretty wide one now that they've reduced that corner for the at the parking level. So all universally positive from our standpoint.
Great, thank you, Mr. Reardon. Let me ask some members if they've got any questions for Mr. Bowman, Mr. Reardon, or Mr. Riggs.
Well,
Mr. O'Brien.
don't know where to start. First of all, I must say that you guys were extraordinarily productive. So hats off to you on this. A couple of quick questions. None of this material has been filed or posted on the website yet. I would assume so. We're all looking at this for the first time, including Mr. Hill, the neighbors, and everybody else. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, Mr. O'Brien, and we will be filing this as soon as possible.
Okay. My first thought is, quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, not so much as a reaction to the design itself, though my initial reaction to it is personal. Personally, is that it seems positive. My initial reaction is that, holy cow, here we are at hearing number 24. We're kind of up against it in terms of considerations. We've got a significant change here. We're up against it in terms of a deadline. What's the board to do? So honestly, that's the first thing that went through my mind, is just being able to digest all of this. I think that fairness would seem to dictate that others should have a shot at digesting it as well. So I don't think we need to get in. We're going to have to hash that out, I think. So that's my first initial off the cuff reaction. My second reaction is that this project has evolved a lot. It truly has been an iterative process. This latest iteration is quite a bit different from where we were not that long ago. Still big. I am heartened to hear Mr. Reardon suggest that the civil engineering aspects of this are aided, particularly from a stormwater point of view. And Mr. Reardon, I guess as I'm thinking out loud here, so bear with me for a minute. It strikes me that one of the iterations we've gone through is we've gone through a gazillion redesigns of the stormwater system. Does this mean that there is a potential for the need for another redesign of the stormwater system?
I'm hoping there aren't any, because basically the stormwater system would have been designed for a a larger project. So if it stays the same, we've got more conservacy in the design. So I'd rather see it not change, because any change would be to only reduce the size of the system, which would in turn would reduce the performance. So I'm hoping it stays exactly the same as it is.
Are there going to have to be some additional calculations, additional work to take place on the civil engineering side, or are we done there?
I feel we're done, and any changes that would come from implementing the change that was described tonight would be positive changes, not requiring any more mitigation, in fact, requiring less.
Okay. The one other question I did have, and maybe it's for Mr. Bomer or Mr. Riggs, and that is that you know, we're going to have stuff on top of these new roofs. We were going to have stuff on the old roofs. So did any of the drawings and whatnot that were put forward to us tonight include the mechanicals and the other stuff that has to go on the roof?
Hi, Frank, I can answer that. Mr. O'Brien, sorry. We don't show the equipment on the drawings today. This is more of a massing study of the building, but I'd be glad to add that annotation to the packet tomorrow, so we can send that over to you.
I mean, wouldn't that impact the sight lines and stuff?
It tends to be centered in the middle of the roof structure itself and set far back away from the edges of the roof. I agree that it's something worth studying, absolutely. But it tends to be set back, you know, in a 65-foot wide building, they tend to be set back about 20 feet from the edge of the roof. So it tends to be out of the view of someone standing on the ground from any of those vantage points.
Thank you, Mr. Riggs. Mr. Chairman, that's all the musings and questions I have at this particular point in time. So thank you, and my apologies for kind of meandering through the project a little bit.
No need. Ms. Jaffer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I, like Mr. O'Brien, I'm trying to sort of digest the changes. It does seem like there are some sort of obvious positives to pulling that part of the building back and focusing on the historic home, and also allowing for space for, I'm guessing, both traffic and pedestrians there. But there's also just sort of some shuffling around happening. And so now it's going higher. And I mean, I guess I would want to know from the peer reviewers what impact that has, right? I think it's about 10 feet higher. And so Mr. Bomer said from Blue Hill Ave, there'll be sort of a significant presence of that building. But otherwise, I don't have a sense as to sort of how going up might matter to different aspects of the project. So I don't know if that's a question for today, but just letting you know that I'm sort of acknowledging that we gained space somewhere else and we lost it, right? It wasn't. And having some experts think through that or opine on that specifically, I think would be helpful. And I guess this is a question I have, and I'll direct it to Mr. Bomer. A lot of the experts, I think, maybe on both sides, I'm not sure if specifically you have mentioned the term intensity of use, which I've tended to associate with like sort of number of units or the number of expected residents, which doesn't seem to have decreased. So I'm wondering whether you have a view as to whether, well, first of all, am I right about that? Are those factors impacting intensity of use? And what's your view on the current intensity of use of the project?
That one's for me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can I address the first one first?
Sure.
Okay. Well, you're extremely perceptive. You know, that's the game you play with moving the blocks around, is is looking at the impact. And again, this is all stuff that's really fresh and new. And my initial feeling is that the massing's been relocated in a way with minimal impact. As you move closer to Blue Hill Avenue, I think you're moving more into concern about the public realm impact, because I don't think it has much impact at all on the other side, on the Meeting House Lane side. So shadow analysis, ground level perspective views, which is why I mentioned the 8 feet. An 8-foot step back on a building is really significant. I'd love to see the drawings. I thought Mr. O'Brien's comments about the mechanical equipment, perfect, absolutely needs to be looked at. That would be a real crime to then put mechanical equipment that everybody going up and down the street sees. So I don't think the developer's at that point of analysis yet, but it has shifted the need for analysis over to the Blue Hill side significantly, and that needs to be studied. So, so it's, again, I'm just basing my initial reactions on experience. It's not a really, really narrow roadway. I think it will be interesting to see the shadow studies and check that impact from the public realm. So that's that part. As far as the intensity of use, that's a really good question. The unit count has only gone down a little bit. So all of the things that are directly related to unit count that are one of the components of intensity of use, or certainly impact of intensity of use, it would include, for example, traffic. And so, and I'm not a big, I'm not an authority on that. It's not a huge change, a very small percentage change. So I wouldn't expect a big difference there. I think Sean has pointed out, I think pretty clearly, a factor that has to do with really almost just percentage of lot coverage. You know, how much space has really been covered by surfaces that aren't going to help mitigate stormwater. And so certainly the smaller footprint is a effective decrease of intensity of use, given that you're holding the unit count sort of constant. It went down a little bit, but not a huge amount. So I don't see this really as a huge change in the intensity of use of all the factors that plug into that. So, but I think while I think it's very clear that if the project were half the size, the intensity of use would be greatly diminished. But I think the exercise we've all been engaging in is looking at whether or not this proposed intensity of use is appropriate. And I think it is. It's a very big, complicated matrix of issues that we're all looking at. So I think it is, what Sean said about the stormwater to me is really meaningful, because I think and the use of terms more slack in the system, that really matters. I don't think it's a responsible development practice to develop to the edge, always push it to the limit. I think that's a very short-term strategy that we've all seen the limitations of in all kinds of development, failures of developments in all different ways that developments fail. So every movement in that direction that just builds more slack in, whether it's providing more bicycle parking or more permeable spaces or whatever it might be, building playgrounds so that it changes how this site is used or diminishes use of other places. So it's been moving in the right direction, but the overall in balance, it hasn't really changed this proposal, other than I think stormwater management. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. a helpful answer to some compound questions. So thank you.
And if I could add something real quick, we've always struggled from day one of this project with just a lack of usable space at the ground level. And every square foot that we get back at that 3,000 is all at the ground level where it's needed most. So, in our view, it exchanges a volume at the upper level of the west building, which actually makes the tops of the building sort of mimic the natural topography. So, the grade in front of the west building is quite a bit higher. It's probably 15, 16 feet higher than the grade at the back of the north building. So, it's not at all inappropriate. It's not creating a situation where you're creating volume that doesn't seem to make sense. It steps down with the natural topography. So from our perspective, giving up the 3,000 square feet or getting back to 3,000 square feet at ground level is far more beneficial than having to give it up at the roof level of the west building.
Thank you.
Ms. Jaffe, any more questions?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Showman, what's the answer to the question of whether or not the stormwater design is going to be modified to accommodate the 3,000 square feet?
Mr. Chair, I believe our engineer is running late, but he is going to be here tonight. The short answer, as far as I'm aware, and civil engineering is only a weekend hobby of mine, let's say. But my understanding is that there will only need to be very slight revisions to the plan, and it's things just to correct numbers because water from coming off the buildings will be going in different places. But my understanding from Jim and perhaps Sean has more to say on this is that there won't need to be significant changes to the design of the stormwater and how it's handled now. Jim, I see you've just popped up. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just let in. Yeah, the 3,000 square feet certainly depends how it's certainly going to be finished. But if it's landscape, you're trading, impervious for pervious, and that certainly allows for less runoff into the stormwater management system as designed. I wouldn't expect to change any of the sizes of the systems at all at this point for 3,000 square feet. We would just let roof runoff turns into surface runoff and less of that, and the system should operate a little bit more efficiently.
So the reason I ask that is the board is going to be relying on the town's peer review consultants when it considers this application. So we're going to need some verification of that issue because that was central to Mr. Reardon's reaction to today's modification. To Mr. O'Brien's point, I too am concerned about time. So I'm going to assume that we're going to hear from that. We're going to hear an answer from that definitively one way or the other soon. And we're going to afford Mr. Reardon some time to evaluate that because that's a key part of the board's reliance. Similarly, I'd like to hear confirmation from both peer reviewers as to whether or not these changes are consistent with their peer review reports and whether or not additional materials are needed for them to confirm that these are acceptable for recommending to the board or whatever the right standard is. I heard in the presentation that we need some more landscape details, which makes sense to me. I mean, if the 3,000 square foot addition or subtraction of massing is going to be replaced with a parking lot, that's very different than, some type of landscaping treatment that might further mask the facade. So I think it'd be helpful to hear from the applicant a commitment as to what that's going to be used for and perhaps some type of illustration so that we can get an idea of what that will look like. I like Mr. Bomer, I'm optimistic that landscaping can help quite a bit, but I think you need to lead that. Similarly, the second design issue that we heard was the issue of the roof treatment. I actually have two questions on the roofs. I'm a little bit concerned. I'm not concerned. I'm a little bit confused on how the roofs are going to look. I know that Mr. Riggs said that the modifications to the west building would try to mimic the roof of the mansion. But that raises a question as to whether or not the roofs are going to be uniform, because I think the roof on the north building is a mansard roof, is it not? And I'm wondering how that, what that's all about. And basically, my question is, are the roofs going to be uniform in appearance?
I can start to answer that now, Mr. Nolan. So the angles of the roofs will be slightly different. Exactly the material treatment is something that we would explore in terms of designing the facade. As Mr. Bomer said, that's sort of its own exercise. I think our strategy we had previously of complementing the existing building with similar material choices, but different detailing and a more modern kind of look at the detailing for that would be consistent in our new design. And we would be deferential to the historic building in terms of how it's detailed and how it looks. I think a goal of ours would be to have all of the buildings complement the historic in terms of the composition holistically. So we wouldn't want them to be jarringly different. But I think a little variety there wouldn't necessarily hurt the design. I think it could be complementary, if anything.
Yeah, I don't, and don't misinterpret, thank you. Don't misinterpret my question either. The board doesn't want to redesign the buildings. The board does want some type of treatment of the roofs that makes sense from an architectural standpoint. I mean, you use the right words in terms of holistic, it's going to make sense. I think from the start, people have had a lot of respect for the mansion and what it represents and the fact that it's been there so long, et cetera. So that seems appropriate to me. What doesn't seem appropriate to me is some type of artificial treatment of a roof to accommodate putting 6 units on top of a building at the last minute of a hearing. And that's what I'm seeking to avoid. So, and that can't happen, just to be clear, that won't happen. The board won't let that happen. So I want this, if this project goes forward, it needs to be presented in appearance as if that was always the original design intent, that west building would be featured at that height and not as if it were an addition thought after the fact, 10 years after the fact, or even 10 minutes after the fact. I think you understand the point. You did a little unit breakdown, which was helpful to me to kind of understand the mix of 1s, 2s, and 3s. I'm wondering, just bigger picture, how does that factor into, how an 84 unit project would ordinarily break down in this market? Or is this an artificially created mix of units to accommodate 84 unit size?
I'll answer that to the extent I can, Mr. Chair. What I can say is that 40B regulations do require these kind of projects to have 10% 3 bedrooms. So that's one, I would say that's one artificial constraint, if you use that word. Other than that, it's really market conditions, I think, that dictate, and really the market for these kind of projects are 2s and 1 bedroom units. That's why we didn't go with smaller studios, and that's why we didn't go with 4 and larger. But other than that, I think it's a matter of finding the marketability, the size of units, and then making that work within the space that you have within those buildings. Dan, did you have any?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, nothing further. Thank you.
Can you represent to the board that unit mix doesn't compromise the project?
I don't understand the question, Mr. Chair.
Well, I wonder if you're compromising the 1s, the 2s, or the 3s in order to get to this particular total, or if this is responsive to the market.
My understanding is that it is, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I see Mr. Tamposi has come on the line, and he may have more information about the marketing aspect of the project than I do.
Mr.
Yes.
Tamposi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a fairly typical split of 1s and 2 bedrooms. As Mr. Schomer said, we need the minimum of 10% 3 bedrooms, but I think this is looking at about 43% 1 bedrooms, 47% 2 bedrooms, and 10% 3 beds. That's fairly typical for this type of project in the Massachusetts market.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm going to confess to not completely understanding the 8-foot setback point that Mr. Bowman made. So I wonder, Mr. Bowman, if you could explain it, or maybe it's on a drawing that Mr. Riggs had up there that I missed. I was wondering if what is the setback from what?
And we haven't seen any, I appreciated your questions about roof line because in the previous iteration, there were uniform roof lines in both the buildings. I think by pulling back that north building, it changes things a bit where it's pretty clear that that north building needs to have a pretty close connection, I think, with the historic building. It's kind of paired with that historic building. On the west building, it's given the west building a little more independence, I think. And the idea of like a 2-story mansard or something like that, I think probably would not be successful. So I totally agree with you. We just need to see what it is. And we haven't seen anything yet of what the proposed elevations are. And as I was saying before, and more importantly, the ground view perspectives. But as I was saying before, that's an outstanding piece along with a new overall landscaping plan. The significance of that step back is that it just gives you more. I think for one thing, it clearly creates an opportunity. Well, it diminishes impact. It diminishes shadow impact on the north side of that building because it's pulled back further. And it also it just gives you more freedom, I think, in being able to design an attic level story that it's much easier to deal with the problems created by that compared with a sheer wall that is just going up another 10 feet. So we haven't seen anything, but it's a lot better to start there than to think you have to fill exactly the same footprint of the floor below.
Okay.
Easier problem to solve, I think is the way I would put it. We haven't seen proposals yet other than what you saw tonight. What you saw tonight is exactly what we saw earlier today.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I have another question, but I forgot to write it down, so I might come back to it. Let me ask, and members of the board, if they've got any other questions before we move on. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no.
I don't, thank you.
Okay, good. Mr. Hill, questions? Comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
I wanted to start off by saying something nice. I really appreciate Embark's work. I think their work is really outstanding. I mean, I think the level of detail, the 3D graphical presentations is very, very strong. And I wish I'd see that more often in the projects I work on. The problem with this current design is that it is not decreasing the intensity use. And the problem is that we are trading a positive in that we're increasing sight lines to Blue Hill Ave, but we're also increasing the height of the west building by 10 feet. It's now going to be roughly 54 feet, not including the projections on top of the roof, which I think are about 6 or 8 feet. So we're actually getting to a point where the west building, the height of the west building is about double the maximum height under your zoning bylaw, which is 2.5 stories and 36 feet. That's problematic, and we aren't decreasing the intensity use. Now, it's interesting that Mr. Bomer has made comments tonight and previous meetings that, he's getting comfortable with the design. He's happy with the direction and so forth. And I think the problem with this whole process is that consultants like Mr. Bomer are sort of stuck in a position of having to look at projects designed based upon the density that's proposed. I don't think Mr. Bomer would say he loves 84 units on the site. I think what he would say is if it has to be 84 units, what's the best 84 unit project I can have on the site? And this might be it, but that doesn't mean that it's a good project. And we have to balance that because it's 40B. So 40B allows for greater impacts, greater intensity of use, which is acceptable from a policy objective. But it really comes down to the balancing test under 40B and whether the applicant has proven to you whether it's met that test. And I come back to what that test is. It's consistent with local needs. It's a definition in section 20 of the statute, and it requires a balancing of the need for affordable housing with things like promoting better site design in relationship to its surroundings and preserving open spaces and protecting the health and safety of the future occupants. That's the language in the statute. And under the case law, particularly the recent case of Fish versus accidental auto body, 2019 appeals court case, makes it clear that the burden of proof is on the applicant. The burden of production and persuasion is on the applicant to prove that they're entitled to the permit. So ultimately it comes down to, does this 84 unit project meet the test? Has the applicant demonstrated that it is entitled to the comprehensive permit by showing that the need for the affordable housing outweighs the impacts that this project presents? And I would submit to you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, that this applicant has not met that burden. The drainage, we've produced information, testimony from Mr. Chesha that the drainage system is still not compliant with stormwater standards. It's based upon Mr. Burke's offsite stormwater report, which most engineers here, I think, have agreed is severely flawed. Mr. Reardon's comments at the last meeting were, I'm not really looking at Mr. Burke's offset report, I'm using my own judgment. But the problem is that it's the applicant's burden to prove that it meets these tests. It's the applicant's burden to prove that the project works, and the applicant hasn't met that burden based upon its offsite drainage analysis. So I think while we do see some positive things with this change, it's not improving the project. It's rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. This project is still too dense. It still has too many impacts. And frankly, it's somewhat frustrating that the applicant comes in tonight and promotes this, what seemed like an epiphany, that they would take off this end of the north building, when that was something that Mr. Bomer suggested on June 7th, almost 2 months ago. So I don't give credit to the applicant. I give credit to Mr. Bomer for raising this issue legitimately. And frankly, the applicant should have made this change 2 months ago. So that's my impression. I think my clients would share that impression. Perhaps they'll speak later tonight. But again, overall, this was a positive step, but it's not enough.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Chair,
Henry.
can I speak?
Ms. Barrett.
So with all due respect, Attorney Hill, let's not lose sight of what the balance means. It's the local concerns against the need. And I think when you look at the town of Milton's track record, there's a long way to go. So while we're all talking about that balance, let's not lose sight of the town's woefully short of its fair share of regional need. I don't want to advocate for this project or any other one. I've got issues with all of them. But I think that every time this local concern balancing thing comes up in this hearing and others, what sort of doesn't get discussed is the need for affordable housing. And the board has a duty under the law to keep that equally in mind with those local concerns. I just want to, that needs to somehow be in this conversation. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. Members of the board, any questions of Mr. Hill? Am I on mute? Oh,
No,
Oh,
thank you, Mr. Chair.
okay. Let me ask,
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were giving, I thought you gave me the Carol Burnett. I didn't, I didn't know you wanted to be recognized.
Yet again, another obscure millennial reference from the chair. So, um, just to follow up on Ms. Barrett's comment, I think it's fair to say that this board is acutely aware of its obligations regarding balancing the needs. And if there was any presentation that the board has heard relative to those, the presentations from the member of from the Board of Selectmen at one of our earlier meetings, where she cited facts and statistics to no end, are also very much in our minds. So we are aware, I believe, what we're obligated to do. So thank you, Ms. Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Let me move the hearing and see whether or not there are any participants who'd like to be heard.
Mr. Chair, could I make one comment?
Mr. Bomer.
Thank you.
You're
And Attorney Hill knows that I have terrific respect for him, and we work in parallel on many projects. And I just wanted to maybe put a different shading on one comment that he did make. It is true that peer reviewers and boards are often put into a situation where they kind of make the best of variables that are fixed and try to make the best stew out of those variables. And in this case, I think Dan was referring to, intensity of use. But I do want to make the point, I made it earlier today, that, and I think Attorney Hill knows this, that I think in other 40B reviews where intensity of use is, in my opinion, really excessive, I think I've been free with criticism of that and push that point specifically. And on this development, as I stated earlier tonight, I'm, in my opinion, I think we're at a reasonable place as far as intensity of use, which is a really complicated formula, multivariable formula. And I've been comfortable with that for a while. It doesn't mean that different things could be achieved if there were fewer units. But putting this in the context of looking at a lot of other 40B proposals, just the overall proportion of open space and scale of buildings and setbacks, scale mitigation. I think there are a lot of boxes that are checked that I don't see happen on a lot of them. And I think in particular on the usable outdoor space, that kind of shift from the sense of just a siting of a large parking structure, shifting that to well-designed buildings with a significant amount of green space around them. That's a big shift. And for me, that from a design perspective, and I'm happy that it does overlap into the civil engineering concerns as well, which is, of course, what everybody hopes for, is that all of these factors are working in concert to come up with a development that works. So I just wanted to correct that point. Dan's exactly right that we are often constrained with problems that appear to be set variables, and we just have to make the best of them. That's not exactly my feeling about where this project is at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Bomer. Participants, any questions from the audience?
Yes, I have Amy and Michael McGrath up twice with both their hands up, so I'm not sure which one wants to speak first.
Mr. McGrath.
I'll allow both to talk and see what comes up.
Hi, this is Michael. I was going to let the wife speak first.
Ms.
I can
McGrath?
talk, that's fine, Michael. So I have a few questions. One of the things that was noted is that to preserve the historic nature of the home, that there would be no units located in the house at all. So I was wondering, I've seen a lot of homes in Milton and elsewhere that have been readapted, to contain units. And it was surprising to me that the developer wouldn't utilize, I mean, I know the house now is probably like 10,000 square feet, right? So I don't know when the side of it's lopped off what's left, but that seems an awful lot of square footage to be just sitting there and not utilized. So I'm just wondering about the ability to shift units into there. And obviously it would be a, people would have to do a careful renovation, but something developers do all the time. So I was just wondering, Mr. Chair, if you could ask, ask the applicant about that.
Yeah.
The other.
Let's get an
question-
answer. Let's get an answer. Mr. Schomer, I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that testimony exactly that way, but I could have
maybe I
misheard it.
misheard it.
So
Maybe I
what
misheard
is how many units are in the mansion?
Ms. McGrath is correct, Mr. Chair. The two units that were previously on the second floor have been removed.
There were only 2 units in the entire mansion to begin with.
That's right.
So what is the mansion going to be used for?
I'll turn that over to Dan Riggs, Mr. Chair. I believe it's additional amenity space and management office and things of that nature, storage.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that what Jesse mentioned is correct. It would be additional back of house storage space, office space, administrative space, and leasing space.
I see.
As we only had the 2 units in there previously.
Ms. McGrath?
That just seems very odd to me. I don't understand that. That is completely, it's a space that's totally unutilized. I've never heard of a developer just leaving that space there. And they're gonna have to, how much space do they need to run 84 units? They're gonna have one management office and the manager is gonna lease the stuff after it's done. So it just doesn't, I don't understand that. I would, request, obviously I don't have the authority to request, but request the board to consider asking the developer to try to program that space and to put additional units in there that then they do not need to increase the height of the building that's on Blue Hill Ave. The other, I just wanted to Ms. Barrett, I totally agree with you about Milton, that we've handled, the town has not handled it well. I looked at, other towns, around us and similar to us, and there's a lot of towns who haven't handled 40B very well, that, the Tamposies know which ones those are, and they're going to those towns. That doesn't mean that, there is a need for affordable housing, but that doesn't mean that people should be forced to have a development where it is pushed to the limit. I know Mr. Bomer had said, pushing something to the limits is bad development. I can't think of an example of something where the stormwater, we still have absolutely no idea what is going to happen with the stormwater. And the reason for that is because of the density on the site and the fact that there's an underground parking garage. And the reason that there's an underground parking garage is because there's 84 units on the site. So, with all due respect, I don't agree that, this is a well, planned out site. 2 procedural questions that I have is the timing of the hearing and how this works, because if people are presented with something, does that mean, we're not going to get to look at, stormwater stuff or landscaping plans or whatever? I don't know, I'm sure you guys will get to that, but it just seems like everything's being jammed at the last minute when we've been talking about, changing density for a while. I don't see this as a change in density. Based on it just moving the deck chairs, and I agree with that. And then my last question is, I know, financial feasibility or whatever the terminology is that's used in 40B jargon. We were told that at each step, we have been told that they absolutely cannot make changes because it is not financially viable with any additional changes. And then a change is made. So at what point, and maybe it's just never, does someone say, you're going to have to prove it to us that you need 84 units, notwithstanding all the stormwater and all the other issues? Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. McGrath.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
Mr. Bowman, you said it perfectly. This is a game you play, and this has been played for 24 meetings. And Mr. Mullen, you said it last week. They want to run out the clock. To think we reduced by 2 units and nobody even speaks, whether it's peer review or the applicant's experts, which I swallow hard to say that. Nobody talks about Robin Street, not once in today's meeting. 152 Robin Street and 176 Robin Street. This has been a game for 24 meetings. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else like to be heard?
Steve O'Donnell,
Mr. O'Donnell.
you on?
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members. Mrs. McGrath stole one of my questions. You have a historic house there, which is said to be the center of this project, which is going to be empty. They took the only 2 units in the house out. By my estimation, the remainder of the house that's going to be left after they demolish part of it is about 8,000 square feet. Now, Mr. Riggs can tell us how many units he could fit in 8,000 square feet. That could be the 4th floor of the West Building. I'm not sure. It seems ludicrous to leave this centerpiece of the project empty while you're adding units on a 4th floor. Now, I do laud the removal of what I was calling the nose of the North Building. That's terrific, but that's something that the peer reviewers and some of the rest of us have been talking about for months. And now at the 11th hour, they say, oh, well, we'll do this. But to leave the house empty and unused just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Second element, Mr. Riggs says they're removing 3,000 square feet off that, what I'm calling a nose on the North Building. Is that having any effect on the underground garage? Or is the underground garage the same size as it was before? Because if it is, it's not helping the groundwater situation at all. So going back to the questions that were asked earlier, does there need to be new drainage systems designed? Well, probably not if the underground garage is going to stay the same size. Certainly there has to be a balance between local impact and affordable housing needs. I understand that. And by the way, I should have said, yes, I'm chair of the Historical Commission, but I'm also a neighbor in view of this project. And I'm speaking tonight as a neighbor. Certainly there has to be a balance between local impact and affordable housing needs. But that doesn't necessarily have to be translated into shoving an excessively oversized project into the middle of a town. There's a way to provide affordable housing in a reasonable, respective process. And we haven't seen that yet. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Mr. O'Donnell. Thank you. Anybody else like to be heard?
There is no one else.
Okay. Questions from the board? Any comments from the board?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Nothing at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Schomer, anything you'd like to add?
Just to, if I may, Mr. Chair, just to very quickly respond to that point that Mr. O'Donnell made, and I think it was a question, and thank you very much for it, sir, regarding what effect it would have on the podium garage. As Mr. Riggs explained, there's a slight modification to that corner of the garage. It will be reduced slightly in extent, which will reduce the impervious surface in that area and ease the pressure in what we're calling the pinch point in that portion of the site, which also allows some additional room for landscaping at the surface and connecting the sidewalk in that area. So hopefully that's responsive to that question.
Okay, so we're going to need, I think a number of questions have come up that caused the applicant to respond, and let me make a list. Let me initially say the board's going to need something on which it can rely in order to consider this application. And there've been enough questions in my mind raised tonight that we're going to need more information, including confirmation on the stormwater design, the landscape plan, some detail on the roof, the placement of the materials on the roof. I do think it's a significant question that's been raised about the programming of the space in the mansion, which, as Mr. O'Donnell and Ms. McGrath have pointed out, or Mr. O'Donnell pointed out, was the centerpiece. And Ms. McGrath raised the question. Does seem to me to be a lost opportunity. I'd like some understanding of why it is that, how it is that we save the building, but it doesn't appear that we're going to be using it for its most optimal use, particularly given the quality of the home. For back office space doesn't, again, the Board of Appeals doesn't want to design it, but we want to at least I want to program it just as one member that I at least understand. And then lastly, I think we're going to have to talk about the schedule. We've not yet seen your conditions, Mr. Schomer, and we've been, I think, accommodating on the schedule, but I don't expect to see the conditions. I don't want to see the conditions on the 10th of August and then have you say that's the last day to take testimony. That's just not fair. So we're going to need an extension of the schedule, and we're going to need, I personally am going to try to take some time off. I don't know exactly how to manage that, given the situation that we find ourselves in. This is not optimal. Let me just put it that way. We did commit to closing the testimony on the 11th for the purpose of conducting deliberations, but I wasn't aware at the time that we'd have 6 or 7 unanswered questions that the board's going to need to rely on, and significantly, we don't have the conditions to which the applicant would agree to be subjected.
Mr. Chair, just so you know, Attorney Schomer did send me some draft conditions. The reason I haven't given them to the board yet is that I'm trying to get information from everybody so that you don't get multiple drafts of the draft conditions. But just so you know, I have received some comments for him. I'm working with Tim to get comments from the town staff. I have Sean's suggested conditions at this point. So there's a lot of material, but it's not consistent or clear, and things are.
Has it ever been?
Excuse me, sir?
No, we'll have one person at a time speak. Go ahead, Ms. Barrett.
Sometimes because the conditions are coming in referenced at different times, the plan references aren't consistent. I'm trying to tie all those loose ends together, frankly, so I don't create a lot of confusion for the board, but I don't have everything yet. I just don't.
Yeah. Mr. Schomer, what's your reaction to the schedule issue?
I think that's an important point, Mr. Chair, and I think it would be remiss to not point out that I think where we are standing tonight is significantly different than where we were 2 weeks ago. There's been a significant development, and I think it's a fair point that the members are raising, that the state of play has changed to a certain extent based on this new plan. So the way we left things 2 weeks ago, I think the members were frustrated, and I think in frankness, we were frustrated as well. But, to be honest with you, Mr. Chair, we woke up the next morning and committed our efforts to trying to make this work. And we've all been through a long process. And forgive me if there's any Seattle Seahawks fans in the audience, but I didn't want to have an interception on the 1 yard line, as it were, with this project. We think that this has come a long way, and it's close to a point where we think that the members are getting close to being comfortable, and we feel that your comments last time encouraged us to go a little bit farther, and so we did that. So thank you very much for you committed at the beginning of this to see this process all the way through, and we appreciate you pushing us to do the same. And thank you very much as well to the peer reviewers and Ms. Barrett for facilitating that process with us. It was due to these efforts that I think that we're here today. So with that said, I think it's appropriate to have an extension with this hearing, because there's a number of, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, a number of items that we need to provide additional detail on. But tonight we really wanted to give you the broad strokes of our efforts and the progress that has been made, and just get your honest feedback to it, and the feedback from the peer reviewers. So we appreciate all the feedback we've received. And from my perspective, Mr. Chair and members, I'm comfortable with moving forward and agreeing to an extension so that we can move forward cooperatively and hopefully to a decision that the members are comfortable with in approving a project on conditions that are agreeable to all parties concerned. So I would say an extension is warranted at this point for us to continue working through and honing these details of the plans.
Yeah. I'd like to push it into September in light of where we are. I'd like to hear from, I don't want to freelance here and speak for the board, but we do have a scheduled hearing next Wednesday, which the commitment was that we'd close the submittal of testimony. I'd like to recommend that we push that into perhaps the third week of September, making this up in light of a couple of things. First, this is the first time that Mr. Hill and his clients have seen this, and we'll give them the opportunity to submit something. I'd like to hear from the peer reviewers on something upon which the board can rely. The members of the board are familiar with decision-making based upon references to drawings and plans and conditions that have some meaning. I'm not sure we yet have that with respect to some of these critical issues. The issues are the same issues that we had on the first day, which is impact to offsite neighbors, stormwater drainage design, and urban design. And I know that they've taken different twists and turns, but it's those three central issues that this entire hearing has surrounded, and I know everybody knows that because everybody has sat through the 24 sessions. So what I'd like to recommend is that if you can give us some details on the landscape, the roof, the conditions. I do want a better explanation. I shouldn't say better, because that infers that it wasn't good, but there really was no explanation of the programming for the mansion. And if that is going to be a central part of the project, I'd like to better understand that. Confirmation on the stormwater design. We'll hear from you on the 11th on that. And then I'd like to take a couple of weeks off to consider your conditions and to have the board prepare for deliberations that we could conduct in September. Does that sound like something that might work for the applicant?
It does, Mr. Chair.
And the members, I haven't spoken to you, so I don't know whether or not you're vacation bound for the last couple of weeks of August. Like every lawyer does. It's a great tradition of the Boston Bar Association.
I'm not.
Could you, Mr. Chair, could you say the dates again that you're thinking of having the upcoming meetings in August?
Well, I was going to meet on the 11th, and I was going to take a couple of weeks off.
Okay.
And I wouldn't mind meeting on the last week of August if that made sense, but I mean, somewhat frankly, it's a little bit dependent upon what we have. I'm thinking we have a hearing specifically on the conditions, right?
Definitely, I think.
But I also want the conditions, to Ms. Barrett's point, I think it's better to spend the time to get something that is reflective of the testimony that we've heard even for the purpose of deliberation, I mean, I made a comment to her that I've got 52. I know, and she had the same reaction. She's some of them may be redundant, but I've been keeping notes, so,
The waivers are even more important than the conditions.
okay, so we need to hear it on the waivers too, and then I think, I would like to suggest that we push this out to, the end of September or something like that.
Jesse, am I wrong? Did you send me draft conditions?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's just so many of these projects going on. I apologize. It gets a little bit daunting after a while.
Mr. Chairman, just for scheduling purposes, I will not be available the last week of August. If I have to hold a hearing from the Cape, I may be divorced, so.
That's September 1st?
Yeah, so I am going to, yes, I am gone. We're back the 2nd, so.
So, Mr. Schumer, perhaps that means that we would meet on the 11th, and then we would meet again on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, something like that.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And then we devote the month of August to working on the conditions. But to Ms. Barrett's point, we would like to hear something on the waivers next week too.
Okay, very
I know
good.
you submitted the waivers, and I know I told you I'd have some feedback. It's probably not appropriate tonight to get into that, but the things that can be conditioned are important to us. Particularly, and I know the people who are listening are interested in that as well, because so many of them are focused on the offsite impacts.
Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to point out, just relative to September 15th, at least on my calendar, because I have made this mistake myself, it is Yom Kippur.
Ah. Okay. All right, so we won't meet on Yom Kippur.
So if we meet next week, what is the continuance after that to September?
Looks like September 8th, Judy.
All right, thank you.
And I know that feels like a long time, but it is the month of August, and I think we're up against some people trying to get away. And I don't disagree with Mr. Schomer that progress has been made, and should thank the applicant for that. I think we've got a little bit more work to do here. So maybe we'd meet on the 8th, the 22nd, and the 29th. Is that all right?
Those dates all work for us, Mr. Chair. And what I would propose in conjunction with that is that we would submit a letter agreeing to extend the public hearing, the 180 days to the 29th in that case then. Is that acceptable?
That's all right. We don't need a letter, but the letter is great to have. I'll publish a schedule that will confirm that you committed to it. So.
Yeah.
We have.
The letter would be a good idea. Thank you.
Good.
Mr. Chair, it's just occurring to me that I have a work conflict on September 8th
Oh, okay.
because I have a mediation on September 9th. So I have a client meeting that evening.
Yep. Could we meet on the 9th?
No, oh,
Why?
I'm sorry, no. We're booked,
Right.
the 7th and the 9th.
Well, I mean, Ms. Sutton, what are we booked on the 9th for? I believe that, as far as I'm aware, we have 2 short extensions that are administrative in nature. Do we have additional hearings scheduled for that night as well?
I'm sure residences of East.
Go ahead, Judy.
I'm sure the residences of East Milton will be up that night.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that project and the Ice House have been on alternating Thursdays, Mr. O'Brien. And we're all kind of hopeful that the Ice House will close pretty soon, but I don't think residences of East Milton will be closed at that point. So they kind of have first dibs on Thursday nights. I mean, I can't speak for that panel, but that's,
Well, no, but the 9th is committed.
yeah, that's what I thought, Beverly.
Okay. Hmm. How about the 14th?
I'm available the 14th,
What night is that, a Wednesday?
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Boy.
Russ?
I hesitate to commit because Canton Ave is resuming on the 7th. So I don't think you should commit to that.
We don't know yet what that schedule is going to be.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the problem.
All right.
And
well,
we have
let's
been
do
off
this.
most of the summer.
Right.
The 7th's probably not going to go forward. Isn't that Rosh Hashanah?
I don't have all those.
I don't know.
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is.
Well, all the more reason for the 14th then.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe Bev, would you mind just getting in touch with Brian and getting his understanding of what he's going to do on Canton Ave?
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Let's
But
do this. Let's devote some time on the 11th to see if we can complete the calendar.
Yeah.
With the goal being to try to get a sufficient number of hearings in between now and the end of September to see if we can conclude our business. That's going to require cooperation on the part of everybody, most especially, I think, the applicant, in terms of getting us that information, and then on a part of our collective team to get some conditions that the board can deliberate over and that can be shared publicly so people can understand where this is headed.
we also have Monday nights occasionally also. If
Yeah.
anybody wants to consider that, that's for the most part empty.
You know what, Bev, would be good, maybe on the 11th, if you had an idea of what was available and
Absolutely.
maybe we could, if we are going to meet on the 22nd and 29th, perhaps we could meet on the 9th or the 10th.
I will look tomorrow and
I'm sorry,
I
not the
know
9th
what you
or the
mean.
10th.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 13th or the 14th, obviously subject to Brian Hurley's requirements, you know?
I know. And he is committed to Tuesdays. We're committed to Tuesdays. So
Yeah.
again, the 9th is not anyways, I will look at my whole schedule tomorrow and get back to you.
Understood. Thank you. A further business in front of the Board of Appeals tonight?
Yes, Mr. Chair, not on scheduling, but
Yes,
on
Offer.
substantive subject matter. To your list of things that would be helpful to see, I just want to remind the applicant that Mr. Bomer mentioned a shade analysis. And I think thank you.
That and thanks for bringing that up. That and the perspective views from the roadway.
Exactly. That was what I was just about to say.
Okay, thanks.
We're on the same page. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
And then also, and I apologize, I was searching my notes and I can't find this, but I have a memory of an expert of some sort being engaged around either water or sewerage. The estimate was, I think, about $20,000. And I was just hoping to be reminded what that project was and where that stands, please.
I can speak to that. Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. That was something that I wanted to bring up as on my own as additional business. So just to remind you, that was a proposal that was, I believe it was given by Weston and Sampson to Chase Berkeley, and it was to do some flow studies for the sewer line in Meeting House Lane. We've spoken with Mr. Reardon about that and Jim Burke about that, and he's had some conversations with Chase Berkeley himself directly regarding that study and what the purpose is and what they're trying to study. And what we've done on our own after conversations with Mr. Berkeley, who told us that he wasn't particular about who did the study. He just wanted to have it done by a registered engineer. So what we've done on our end is we have looked for an independent third party consultant who could do that study, and we've got some pricing on them. And the reason why we did that was twofold, really. primarily due to time-sensitive nature of the study, because Weston and Sampson's review was proposed to take a number of months. We have a consultant lined up who can get started, in fact, next week, and they would propose to do flow studies for about 2 weeks in order to get some meaningful data on the flow in that sewer line. So I'm glad you brought that up. We do intend to proceed with that work immediately. If it pleases the board, we'll get started right away, and we can have it meters out there hopefully Monday morning.
Thank you for the update.
I think you should. I'd like Mr. Reardon to be informed of the name of the firm doing the work.
I can tell you now, actually. It's EST Associates. They're out of Needham.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add one thing to that. Great, really appreciate that. Getting that kind of data is invaluable. What I would suggest is the cost of leaving it in for a little bit longer is inconsequential. So the critical thing is to make sure we have a period that has a storm event during it. So if it means leaving it in for another week or so to get that, that's critical to the analysis.
You know, the thing to do is to think about getting the report in time so that the board can have it before we close the hearing. So, you know, working around those dates about which we just had a conversation might be helpful. Fair enough?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair. I think that's exactly what we had in mind. And I didn't mean to imply necessarily that the meters would be pulled out and removed and the study would stop after 2 weeks. Just that we wanted to get at least 2 weeks of data so that we could bring something meaningful to the board's attention before the hearing closes.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Mullen, it's Michael McGrath. I have some videos that would be great for the engineers to look at.
Yeah, maybe you could send those along to Ms. Sutton. We could get those loaded up on the website, make them available. Okay? So does that work for you? I think you're muted.
Sorry about that.
That's
I just think I think it would be great. Mr. Berkeley has the videos.
Oh, he does. Okay.
I think it would be great for Mr. Reardon to get them from Mr. Dennehy or Chase to
Okay.
pass along to ES, whatever the company is.
Are these different videos than the ones that are currently on the ZBA's website?
You know what? I haven't looked, but actually,
Yeah,
no, I don't, I haven't looked on the website how many other people have posted videos, but
Okay.
I think I've got some pretty good footage all the way from Robin Street, all the way to Alfred Road, the two streams, the intermittent stream and the one that goes by down 152 Robin Street, right through their property, all the way to Alfred Street or Alfred Road. They're pretty explicit in the two that are up, but I have about 4 other videos that are pretty dramatic on the flow. Instead of just saying we're going to do a little bit of a study, they're pretty dramatic.
Mr. Chair, if I could recommend that whatever information just gets posted to the website, I rely on the materials that Mr. Zawinski posts to the website as kind of the record. So I don't want to confuse anything. I'd rather get all the information directly from the website. And there are 5 or 6 videos up there right now that I've already looked at, but if there are more, happy to see them.
I have 3 others I'll be happy to pass along to Mr. Dennehy and Mr. Berkeley for you to look to review or for them to put up, or the powers to be to put up.
Let's do that. And maybe
Well,
Bev, if you could just follow up with Mike.
yes, Dan, where are you? Your hand was up.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry, Beverly, I was just, I just got disconnected by accident. I was just rejoining. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, so we'll follow up on Mr. McGrath's videos and get those on the website. Ms. Sutton knows how to. We'll follow up with Mr. Dennehy. Is there any other business for the board tonight?
Just a question, Mr. Chair. You mentioned at the beginning that you wanted to hear some testimony, from the peer reviewers regarding the most recent submittal of materials. Would you prefer to wait until next week on that?
I think so. Why don't we get the supplemental material and then we'll hear it once.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. unless there's more business for the board, we'll stand in recess until 7 o'clock, excuse me, next Wednesday, August 11th. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night now. Bye now.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody.
Bye-bye.